Hi everyone, Chris here from IELTS Advantage with quite a special video today. What we're going to do in this video is introduce you to our team. So we have some of our great IELTS experts who work for IELTS Advantage with us today. We have Damien, we have David, and we have Michelle. And what we thought we'd do is to let you guys understand the myths and the misconceptions surrounding IELTS. Because what we found at IELTS Advantage is improving your score is as much about unlearning some things and stop doing some things that a lot of students do, as much as learning new things and improving your skills. Because there's so many myths and misconceptions about the IELTS test, and we're going to talk about a number of them today. And if you are making these mistakes, and it's not normally your fault, it's because you've read it on the internet or someone has taught you this. This could be the main reason why you're failing the test. And it's also about focus as well, focusing on the things that will actually improve your score and ignoring the things that will not improve your score. But before we get into the myths and the misconceptions surrounding IELTS, can we start off by just introducing ourselves a little bit? I think people probably know who I am. I'm Chris Pell. I'm the founder of IELTS Advantage, and I've been teaching IELTS for more years than I can actually remember, at least 10 years, I think. Michelle, can you introduce yourself to everyone?
Hi everybody, my name is Michelle. I am originally from Canada. That's where I grew up, but now I live in England. And I've been an English teacher for almost 20 years. And an IELTS teacher for about 6 years. I used to be an examiner. I was an examiner when I lived in Saudi Arabia. So I've lived in quite a few different countries, and I've had the privilege of teaching students from lots of different countries. And that's me.
Excellent. Thanks, Michelle. David.
Hi, everybody. My name is David. I've been teaching English, again, like Michelle, almost for 20 years. I've been teaching IELTS for the past 8 years. I have been an IELTS examiner in Asia, both in Indonesia and in Vietnam. However, I'm now settled back in Wales in the UK, working for IELTS Advantage, and I really love helping people reach their goals.
Excellent. Thanks, David. Damien.
Hi, my name is Damien. I'm originally from North Wales, but I currently live in the south of Spain. I've been a teacher for about 16 years, so since 2006. I've been an IELTS teacher since about 2012, so similar to David, about 8 years. I've taught students from all around the world. It's actually, I actually get surprised when I find a new country, a nationality from a new country. It's really interesting to me to help people and meet people from around the world and to achieve their goals. I have been helping people get their IELTS scores since about 2012, and I've also helped students get onto academic courses, and I've worked for the University of Manchester and seen the results of that journey and when people are undertaking their master's courses there. That's me.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. So to the people watching, students watching, it's very rare for you to have what we probably have nearly 100 years or 80 years of experience teaching English just on this video, and having examiners to tell you what is right about the test and what is wrong about the test, those misconceptions. So it's a great opportunity for you to dispel some of those myths and really focus on what matters. So let's start off with Michelle. Michelle, what would you like to start off by talking about?
So some students are a bit nervous when they go into the speaking test for lots of reasons, but one of the reasons is they believe that they can't ask the examiner any questions during the test. And that's actually not true. So not only can you ask the examiner questions about what a word means or to repeat what they've said, it doesn't affect your score. So I've had lots of students in the past that I've been helping prepare, and I can see when we're practicing that they haven't understood the question and they're reluctant, even just in the classroom, to ask me to say it again or to ask for the meaning of the words. And I think it's really important for students to know that it doesn't affect your score at all. So in any part of the test, if there's a word that you don't understand or you don't know, you can ask, what does what does that word mean, or what is this word? And the examiner will give you a very short answer. And you can also ask the examiner to repeat it. And sometimes students like to get a very, make a very long question, say, I'm very sorry, I couldn't understand that. Could you say it? And you don't have to make a very long question. You can just say 2 words, and it's really easy. Say again. Mm-hmm. And you have rising intonation, say again. Mm-hmm. And it's really quick. It doesn't take any time. It doesn't interrupt the test. And the examiner will just repeat the question for you. And it does not affect your score at all.
And you made a really good point earlier that now that we're in a different situation in the world, that some examiners might be wearing masks. Do you think that would have an effect on students, might put them off or might make them uncomfortable? How could they deal with that?
Well, I think it is important to know that your examiner might be wearing a mask, but certainly they're going to be aware that when somebody can't see their mouth, it's going to make it a little bit harder to understand, because we watch people's lips, and that actually helps us more than we think. So I know that certainly if I was examining, I would enunciate extra clearly to help the candidate, and the examiner doesn't want to make it more difficult for you. They don't want to trick you. They don't want to make it more difficult. So they will be doing that. For yourself, if you're going to wear a mask, also just be aware that the examiner can't see your lips as well. So just enunciate clearly, and the examiner is going to be listening extra carefully to try to catch what you're saying. So yes, it can make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. You might want to get used to wearing a mask if you're not used to wearing a mask or talking with the mask, so you get used to how it feels, because it is different, isn't it? When you kind of, smell your own breath when you're talking. Some of you brush your teeth before you're going to take the test if you wear a mask. But, we're all in this together. And we're going to do what we can to help each other sort of, and keep each other safe. And that's really the most important thing right now.
Yeah, brush your teeth before going into bring your toothbrush to the center. Good advice, Michelle, because I think one of the complaints that we get a lot from students would be that they felt a little bit intimidated by the examiner, because the examiner might not have been, not unfriendly, but not overly friendly to them. Damien, David, what would you advise students in that context, where a student feels that the examiner is not being friendly or not helping them give their best score?
In fact, this is a question that many students ask. And again, it's kind of related to the body language between the candidate and the examiner. A lot of candidates often get put off or distracted by the examiners because the examiners are quite strict. I can't quite think of a word here.
Formal? There might be
yes,
a bit
the
formal.
Examiners, because the examiners are very formal, the candidates often think they have to be the same, and eye contact and things like this are very important. However, again, related to the masks, eye contact, body language is not important. Mm-hmm. So when you walk into that room with the examiner, try not to think about what the examiner is feeling. Try not to think about the pressure in the room, the mask. Just think about the questions, your English, and clarity. Mm-hmm. So body language, eye contact, again, this will not affect your score. Just think about giving clear answers.
Yeah, I think it's actually called mirroring, where when you meet someone, you mirror, you replicate their body language and their tone and everything. So that's a really, really good point, that the examiner might be focusing on their job and being very formal and very rigid and not being overly friendly. And that might affect the student by intimidating them, but it also might affect the student by encouraging them to speak in that kind of overly formal, robotic way. Mm-hmm. Damien, is that what the examiners are looking for, like a robotic, formal, academic delivery in the speaking test?
In fact, Chris, they're looking for the exact opposite.
Yeah.
They're looking for clear, natural English. Yeah. So if that's what you can produce, that's fantastic. Don't feel as though you need to be as formal as the examiners. Don't feel you need to give high-level vocab and structures like the examiners. Clarity is king.
the tip that I always give to students when the speaking test is just pretend you're speaking to a friend. Like just because I know that's weird to like go in and somebody might be from a different country from you and a different background, and it's a really high pressure situation. But the more you're able to speak to that person as a friend in this, you know, because your fluency will improve and your pronunciation will be clearer. But I've often found that vocabulary and grammar will also improve because if students are less nervous and they're a bit more relaxed, then they tend to make fewer mistakes as well. So.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Chris. I've noticed a lot doing mock speaking tests that part one, students tend to make a lot of small errors they know they're wrong, that they wouldn't normally make because at first they're a little bit nervous. And so at the end in the feedback, I always say, you know, you need to approach that this is an informal chat with a friend. Yes, of course, you need to, you know, be clear and think about the language you're producing, but at the same time, relax. This is a conversation. And if you're in that mindset, you're going to produce more idiomatic language, you're going to speak, you know, use more connected speech, you'll be connecting ideas together, and everything follows on from that mindset, really, of being comfortable in that situation.
Absolutely. I totally agree. So that's 2 myths dispelled already. You can ask the examiners 2 questions. You can say, can you repeat the question? Or you can say, can you explain what that word means? So that should help many students out. And the second one is body language. Body language, eye contact, your clothes that you're wearing, hand gestures, none of those things really matter because the examiner is assessing fluency, grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation. Body language, eye contact, hand gestures have nothing to do with those things. So relax about those, and also don't focus on those things during your preparation because it's a waste of time. Okay, cool. Damien, what's a big myth or misconception that you have found over the years working with IELTS students?
One of the biggest is that the only thing you need to do is practice. Now, this is going to sound strange, a teacher saying don't practice. Of course, I'm not going to say that. Working hard, practicing is essential. But if you only practice, you're not going to see any improvements. In fact, it might even make situations worse because if you're not seeing improvements, you get more frustrated. You don't know what's happening, and it's going to lead to bad results. So what I mean by this is, yes, you do, let's say you write a task 2 essay, or you do a speaking test. What you should do after that, instead of just going on to the next one straight away, is you need time to stop and reflect on what just happened before. So that could be, you know, thinking about the good things you did, but also the weaknesses that you've had. And then you need to be very specific about that. You can't just say, I've got a weakness in grammar. I need to do more with grammar. Okay, that's good, but what does that mean? Grammar's huge. There's so much grammar. You need to be very precise. So instead of just jumping to a next practice, you need to understand what the problem might be. So let's say, for example, I have a general problem in grammar. I need to identify what that main problem is. So my most frequent mistake could be, let's say, the use of articles in writing or in speaking. So then you need to go and do something about that. You need to first understand the rules. If you don't understand the rules, then you can't implement them. Then once you've understood, that's not the end. You then have to do practice exercises to make sure you're controlled, exercises to make sure that you're being accurate. And then you need to use them in your language when you're producing, so writing or speaking, whatever it might be. And then that might not be the end anyway, because you might be 70% successful, but you're still making some mistakes, and you still need to identify what is it about those particular mistakes I'm making. What is it? Am I not understanding it? Is it a particular context that is an exception? So all these thought processes are things you need to go through. Instead of jumping from one practice to another, you need time in the middle to understand your weaknesses, understand what's the problem, and do something about it. If you don't do that, then students tend to make repeat mistakes.
Yeah, Laura had a really good example. Laura is another teacher who works with us, and he said it's kind of like 4 legs on a chair, and if you take one of the legs out, you're going to fall on the ground. So I think if you don't identify your weaknesses, you're going to be in trouble. If you don't learn the correct thing to do, you're going to be in trouble. If you don't practice that thing, you're going to be in trouble. And if you don't get feedback on that thing, and I think a lot of students focus on one of those things. So they'll focus a lot on practice, or they will watch every YouTube video and just learn, or they will just focus on feedback. And it's really understanding that it's part of a whole system. And if you miss one part of the system out, then you're going to be in trouble. Would everyone agree with that?
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. Excellent.
Yeah. And I think it's also really natural to want to avoid working on those things that we find quite difficult, because nobody likes to do things that are that difficult. It's like when you go to the gym, right? If any of you are into exercising and you go to the gym, and you'll see certain people that have got maybe just like, really well developed biceps, and they're always in there doing bicep curls, but it could be that their lower back is really weak, which is going to, hurt them in the long run, but they don't want to work on that because they're not as strong, because they go down to, the smaller weights, and it hurts and you get sore. And so I think it's very natural to want to avoid, really, really focusing on your weaknesses and addressing those. And it's human nature to just try to ignore those difficult things. That are difficult for us, and everyone's got different areas that they struggle with.
And it's often, I wouldn't say that, it's easy, but what I see a lot of people doing is there's two very common scenarios. One, they will read every single IELTS book, watch every single YouTube video, do every single course. Or the other type of person will do every practice test available, every single Cambridge practice test, and then they'll go, I'm not improving. And that could take someone a year to do all of that. But what is more difficult is spending 15 minutes actually working with a teacher or by yourself and go, what am I not good at? Like, what is the main reason why I'm being very targeted and very strategic? Because as Damien said, and you guys can tell me if you agree or disagree, the number of students that we work with that only have one or two problems, and the rest is good. Like articles is a perfect example, and they might be working for years on everything except articles, but once they identify that and fix that, then everything becomes better. Would that be extreme, that most people just need to fix one or two things, or?
No, I don't think so. I think that's absolutely right. So when a lot of students want to jump from a 6.5 to a 7, that's the most common goal that a lot of students have. And you think, well, they think if I just work a little bit harder, in a general sense, it will naturally happen, but it doesn't, because as you say, if you're not solving that problem, if there are 3 legs in your table, it's always going to be falling over. So you need to put that extra leg in, and if you ignore that problem, it will never go away. And so I think going on from what Michelle said before about the gym is a really good analogy. It's almost like being honest with yourself, and it's hard. It's the hardest thing for any human to do, to be honest and criticize ourselves. And so, but if you do that, it has the biggest rewards, because that is the thing that's stopping you. There's nothing else.
Absolutely. It is the most difficult thing, but it's the thing that gives you the most power once you figure it out. Because a lot of people talk about shortcuts and hacks and tips and tricks. That is the number one hack, is be honest with yourself, establish your greatest weaknesses, and focus and improve those weaknesses. So excellent advice.
I'd like to jump in there as well, Chris, and agree with your point there that people only usually have 1 or 2 issues that they have to fix. And quite often, I remember when I was doing IELTS exams in the past, I would do a speaking test with somebody. Now, IELTS examiners can't give or can't speak to candidates, but quite often, after finishing one of the speaking tests, the candidate would leave the room, and I would think to myself, oh, if only that person fixed this one thing. I wish I could tell them just to focus on this one thing. So I definitely agree. Just 1 or 2 issues, and if you could fix those, you'll have a chair to sit on.
Yeah, if I was the CEO of IDP or the British Council, that's one thing that I would bring in, to not give people a detailed report on, because it would end up costing a lot of money, and I think it would affect the security and the reliability of the test. But for the ability for the examiner to just tell the student, work on these 1, 2, or 3 things. These are your main areas of weakness, and then I think it would become a much fairer test. But I'm not the CEO of British Council.
And that's why these mock tests are so valuable, because now I am able to say, oh, look, you just need to identify and fix this one issue, keep practicing that. And students are successful because of it.
Yeah, and it ends up being much cheaper in the long run. It's much cheaper to hire a good teacher or attend a good course than to fail the test multiple times over and over and over again. So excellent advice, guys. Thank you so much. One of the questions that I get asked very regularly is, do I need to speak with a British or an American accent to get a high band score on the speaking test? And the answer is no. You do not need to speak with a particular accent, because that would be, number one, that would be incredibly unfair, and number two, it doesn't really it's not a good representation of what a British accent is or what an American accent is. David is British, Damien is British, Michelle's husband, I think, is British, and they all have very different accents. Where I am right now, you could drive 20 miles down the road one way and the accent will change, and then 20 miles down the other way and the accent will change. So I think that this is maybe comes from a misconception about what good English looks like or what good English sounds like. You don't have to sound like the Queen of England. You don't have to have a standard American accent. And I also think that this is one of the areas where IELTS is very fair, because they judge you on clarity. They don't judge you on having an RP accent or having a Canadian accent or having something like that. What the advice that I always give to students is that use your own accent, but focus on clarity. Think of someone, I think everybody probably knows someone like a celebrity or an intellectual or a news presenter or something like that from their own country that speaks very, very good English, but they use their own accent. I know I've spoken to a lot of students from India and from China and from Vietnam. It's like, well, model yourself on that person who has retained their accent rather than trying to sound like the Queen of England, because you don't need to sound like the Queen of England, and you're going to waste a huge amount of time trying to sound like that rather than just focus on your own accent. And I also think that it's important to say that your accent is your identity. And if someone is telling you you need to change, you need to sound more British, then there's issues with that, because they're telling you to change who you are as a person, which I don't think is a nice thing to say to a student. That's controversial advice in the ELT community, but would any of you agree or disagree with me on that just in the context of IELTS?
I would completely agree with you. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that accents, the variety of accents, enrich life. They're beautiful. I love hearing accents, not just within my own country, from all over the world. I mean, the world would be a much poorer place if we all tried to sound the same. It's an unfair, as you say, a completely unnatural thing to expect. And so, as you say, I think clarity, that's all we're looking for. Can you be understood? An accent doesn't stop people from being understood. It's pronunciation, which is a slightly different thing. It's the sounds you're producing rather than the more of the wider accent that they are within.
And from a practical point of view, I would say to a student to become familiar with the phonemic chart and phonemes and individual sounds of English, and identify which sounds they have a problem with. So my wife is from Vietnam, and in Vietnam, they never put their tongue between their teeth when they're speaking. So they have a problem with and the. Damien, you're in Spain. I think the v's and the b's are a problem with Spanish speakers.
So there's only one sound for both letters, and pronouncing ed endings, for example, they would just pronounce them ed, everything ed, rather than the three different types that we have.
So every language, every culture has comes from a background where the pronunciation is totally physical, and like the Vietnamese example that I used, it's nothing to do with your intelligence or anything like that. It's just what you're used to doing. There are sounds in Vietnamese that I just cannot make because I've never made that shape with my tongue and with my lips, and that's all it really is. It's just the position of your lips and your mouth and your teeth, and just pushing air out of your mouth and making a sound. It's nothing to do with, you know, with your background or anything like that, really. What would you guys have to say about pronunciation in the context of the IELTS test?
Yeah, I would totally agree with what you said, Damien and Chris. And I think that students do sometimes confuse pronunciation, intonation with accent, because of course, different people from different parts of the world use different intonation patterns. So I'm from Canada, and I've been living in England for a while now, and I noticed that my intonation patterns have changed. And actually, when I talk to my family, when I go back to Canada, everyone tells me I sound really British, and I just don't hear it. But it's because my intonation is slightly different.
Yeah.
What I'm doing is I'm using my intonation to help the listener pick out the important information and to convey meaning. And that's what we're looking for when we're listening to you speak, right? It's not about British rules or American rules or, you know, an accent from, you know, your own personal accent. I've got my own personal accent. That's like a mishmash. But, you know, in terms of English pronunciation, there are ways that English pronunciation works and the way sounds change at word boundaries. And that's what we're looking for when we're listening to students, because it's about clarity and it's about meaning.
Yeah, it would be horrible if there was like a standard way everybody had to speak English. That would not be a nice world to live in. And intonation is a funny one. I think a lot of people from Northern Ireland, where I'm from, when we go over to England, they think that we're America. They think we sound very threatening or something, because we tend to go down. I remember saying to a friend once, and when I was in Vietnam, he was American. I was like, I know where you live. It's like, he was just like, do you know where I live? And I was like, yeah, I know where you live. And he's like, shit. Whereas someone from England would be like, oh, I know where you live. You know? So yeah, I can get you into trouble as well. Would you agree, or any advice, David, for a student that is worried about their accent or about their pronunciation when it comes to the IELTS test?
Clarity. It's really useful to look at that phonemic chart and just make sure you're pronouncing the sounds correctly. Now, one way of doing this, a lot of the time when I meet candidates and students studying English, when I meet people with really clear pronunciation, I always ask them, how did you do it? How did you practice? And the most common answer is copying YouTube, and not trying to sound perfect. A lot of the time, these people are in the privacy of their own homes, and they don't really care how silly they sound. They'll sing to little jingles, they'll copy little phrases on YouTube, and doing that, listening to native speakers and trying to copy that sound. That's really important.
Yeah, the student who had the greatest improvement in pronunciation was a Vietnamese student that I worked with, who he was obsessed with Game of Thrones, and he would just watch Game of Thrones and like, because a lot of the accents in Game of Thrones, they're not British, but they're not American either. Like they're middle of the road. They're normally very, very clear. So he learned it that way, just by pausing the DVD or whatever it was, and repeating it, and doing that over and over and over again. But I think the reason why he got so good was he enjoyed it at the same time. I think because pronunciation is a physical thing. It's like going to the gym. If you do lots of bicep curls, you'll get big biceps. If you don't, you won't, sort of thing. So it is about identifying your the areas of pronunciation you need to work on, and then working on that and find an enjoyable way of doing it as well. I think podcasts, movies, songs are a great way to do that. So cool. Excellent advice. All right. So we'll go back to Michelle now. Michelle, what's another big myth?
A lot of the time when I'm helping students prepare, they want to know about using high-level vocabulary. And so what high-level vocabulary can they use to get a band 7? And I think this is a really common misconception, whether it's for the writing test or the speaking test. there's no checklist that the examiner has where, you know, they've got different categories and they're listening for how many low level and high level words. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, first of all, I think that if Chris, Damien, and David and myself were to try to come up with a list of the high level words, we'd be here all day because it just doesn't exist, right? So like David said earlier, clarity is king. You've got to use the right words to communicate the specific idea that you've got in your head clearly, so that the reader or the listener knows exactly what you mean. And if you can do that, right, then that's what we're looking for a band 7 level. You know, you don't have to use idioms. And in fact, I'd probably recommend that you don't try to insert idioms because they're very, very difficult to get correct. And, you know, the more mistakes you make, the lower your score goes. So don't force it, just be clear. And if you can do that, then that's exactly what the examiner is looking for.
So this, even when I give students this advice, they disagree with me. So it's easy to disagree with one person. Now we have 4. Can you get a high score in IELTS speaking test without using idioms or lots of idioms?
Yes, you can. You absolutely can.
Yeah, I think this comes from a misconception in the marking criteria. It talks about idiomatic language. So I think it's in band 8 for vocabulary. What is the difference between idiomatic language and using lots of idioms?
Well, I would say the difference is that idiomatic just means how a native speaker would say it or how it is naturally said. And of course, that's going to be different in different parts of the world. And again, it doesn't matter exactly how you say it, but in a natural way. And how we don't speak is in an academic way, the same way we would write. And so often I've you know, had speaking tests with candidates who try to speak as though, you know, they're writing an essay, and they would ideally like to give me a speech, right? They'd write it out in essay form and then read the speech, and that's not it. That's not how people talk to one another, right? So even like just the kind of language that we've been using here today, I don't think that anybody has used an idiom yet. No. Nobody's
listen to a podcast of 2 native English speakers talking to each other, even an academic or high level podcast, and count how many idioms they use. They don't, or count how many words they use that you, like a high level English learner, would not understand. Very, very few. Cambridge actually have a really amazing tool that you can put in any text, and it analyzes the level of the words. So it looks at A1, A2 words, B1, B2, C1, C2. So A1 and A2 are low level words, but, you know, they're words like and, because, you know, and then B1, B2 kind of in the middle, and C1, C2 at a very high level. And what I've done is taken like academic journal articles from Cambridge and Oxford and Harvard and MIT and put them into that, and then they all follow the exact same pattern as good band 8, band 9 essays as well, which is the vast majority, like 60-70%, A1, A2 words. And then there's like 10-20% B1, B2, and C1, C2 for band 8, band 9 essays, and Harvard, Cambridge, Oxford academic journals, you know, the very, very reliable high level writing, 2-3% C1, C2 words. And they only use those words when it is necessary to use them, because there's not an easier word to use. There's also a great, George Orwell wrote a essay on, I think it's called On Good Writing. And the number 1 rule was, don't use a complicated word when a simpler word will do. And George Orwell knows a little bit about writing, I think. So
I think that's a great point. And I think that a lot of students do themselves a disservice by just focusing on expanding their vocabulary, because if you just use the words that you already know but use them correctly, then you probably have enough words, you know, to get the score that you need.
Absolutely. And I think this comes a lot from how vocabulary is taught in many IELTS books, IELTS YouTube channels, IELTS schools, where they will say to the student, learn my list of band 9 or golden, or I've heard diamond vocabulary, and you'll get a high score. Damien, David, what would you say if your student said, can you give me a list of high-level vocabulary?
I would say, similar to what Michelle says, use the words you know now, but you need to use them correctly. If you don't understand every context that word can fit in, if you don't know the formation of that word, if you don't know how it fits in a sentence grammatically, then you don't know how to use it correctly. So Michelle also hit on the nail on the head. Well, there you go.
There you go. There's an idiom.
She was correct, absolutely correct, when she said it's communication. At the end of the day, when you're writing an essay, for example, you think it's like you're alone, but you're not. You're communicating with someone. Someone at the end of this was going to read this. Same with when someone writes your reading, someone's written that for you to read. It's communication. So have an idea, communicate in the most simple, clear way possible. You don't speak to your friends and family or go to a shop and use the most formal and complicated language in your own language, do you? That would be very strange. And it wouldn't have an appropriate ending. The ending is, has that person understood what I want to say? And that's communication.
Yeah. Someone on YouTube commented the other day that, sir, you have a plethora of mistakes in your sample answer, and I will elucidate the reasons why when you tell me your band score. And it's like, okay, I know what's going on here. But yeah, what would you say to someone watching this who is like, it says in the marking criteria you need to use a wide range of vocabulary? What you're saying is the opposite of that. What you're saying is to use simple language and to use the language that I already have.
I would say, firstly, you know more words than you think you know. I'm not sure the statistics I have seen them previously. I can't bring them to mind right now, but students at a B2 level, for example, have a huge range of vocabulary, certainly enough to convey any idea that they want to explain. And so it's trusting that you do have the tools to answer a particular question. And if you don't, by the process of studying, reading an IELTS article, by listening, by doing those things, you're actually expanding. If you've understood those words, written them down, recorded them, etc., you're actually slowly expanding your vocabulary. The key there is slowly and naturally doing it, not like, okay, I'm going to learn 20 words today. It doesn't work that way. You have to use it, understand them, find them in context, use them in context, and then actually your vocabulary is going to expand naturally, and you'll understand how to use all those words, rather than I'm going to expand it very rapidly and you'll never know how to use those words perfectly.
Absolutely. I thought of a really good idea for another video. Imagine if you gave us four a list of 20 high-level words and told us that we had to include them in an IELTS essay. So we wrote that essay, and then we wrote an essay where we just used the appropriate words to help us clearly communicate the answer, and look at the difference in the clarity and the effectiveness of that essay. As native English speakers and as IELTS teachers, we could not do that, and it would lower our scores. So giving that to a student who is really struggling is very, very dangerous. And I think if of all the things that a student could stop doing, it would be trying to use words they just do not know how to use, because they think that that's how to get a high score.
Excellent. I think another common misconception is that it doesn't really matter how many attempts you make that are wrong, as long as you've attempted some and got those right. But it doesn't really work that way. If you try, basically, I always have my bucket of high level words, and students are take a handful and chuck them in the essay. Some will land where they're supposed to, but most won't. And it's not like the ones that you got right are so good that it cancels out all the mistakes.
Absolutely. Because you're being judged on the fundamentals. You're being judged on can you use A1, A2, B1, B2 words, not can you luckily use a C2 word. The examiner's not going to look, oh my God, they used the word plethora. They must be amazing. But they have misused the word and an and because and basic words like that. I don't know whether any of you are into sport or to basketball, but the greatest basketball player of all time is Michael Jordan. And the thing that everyone says about him is his fundamentals, the basics, were better than everybody else's. He was also able to do amazing things that no one else could do, but he had to build that from a foundation. And if you look at any good cricket player, football player, artist, Picasso mastered all of those fundamental aspects of painting before he was able to do whatever he did. I'm not 100% sure, but I remember Picasso talking about that and saying that he had to study for 50 years the fundamentals before he was able to bring it to the next level. So there's lots of examples of that throughout the world.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, Chris, and it kind of leads into another misconception that a lot of students have, that there's like a trick that you can learn.
Good.
And that's it. You just got to learn the tricks, and
yeah.
You're good.
Yeah, so I'll put that out there to everybody. Can you use tricks and tips and hacks and shortcuts to get a high score? Because this is what we are asked every day. Or we get emails. Can you just give me some top 10 tricks to trick my way to getting a band 7? Does that work?
I think I would be here for a very long time trying to think of tips, because there aren't any. The biggest and only real tip that I can think of is work hard. Identify your weaknesses. Nothing really beats hard work. Tips and tricks. People talk about them. People try to share them, but there really aren't any. The only thing you can do is work hard.
Absolutely. Damien, would you agree?
I agree completely. Yeah, absolutely. So it's working hard, and as we said before, working hard in a smart way, like identifying mistakes, working on them. But there is no other way. That's the reality is facing the reality. This is hard. It's going to be difficult, but you can do it by breaking it down, achieving those small goals, and working towards the bigger target.
And I also think that it's a bit of an insane thing to do, because why do you look for shortcuts and tips and tricks? It's to get something easily and quickly. But the result is that you will fail the test again and again and again and again. We survey our VIP students when they come in, and we say, well, how many times have you failed the test? And the average is 3. That's an incredibly high average. That means a lot of our students are failing the test 5, 6. We've had students fail the test more than 10 times by focusing on tips and tricks and trying to, those tricks didn't work. Let's look for these other tricks. And that could take them 2 years of their life and thousands of dollars. And I think you'll see this in other industries as well. The one that springs to mind is like the diet and fitness industry, that, drink my magic potion or take my magic pill, and you will look like, you'll look like an Instagram model in 2 days. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
And I think I have a theory that a lot of marketers have taken over the IELTS business, or marketing departments have taken over schools. Marketing 101 is ask your market what they want, and then give them what they want. So when you ask students, the marketing team, what do you want? I want a shortcut. I want a tip. I want a trick. So the marketing team tells the teachers, I want you to give them that. And that is very dangerous, to leave marketing in charge. I think because I don't want to say that that's criminal. I don't want to say that they're ripping people off. But I think whenever you take teachers out of the equation, then that becomes very dangerous. Would you agree with that? Or maybe that's just a conspiracy theory. But.
Yeah, but I also think that, even from well-meaning teachers, there's a temptation to give students a good service, and a lot of teachers mistakenly think as well that they can help teachers or help students by giving them tricks and tips. I think there's a massive difference between someone who's aiming for a band 5 and someone who's aiming for a band 7 as well. Because I've often had students, bring me, grammar structures and go, "Can I use this?" And I think, well, can you memorize it and use it? Yeah, I suppose you can, but you can't memorize your way to a band 7 answer. But, if you've ever taken, a class, an English class, or, if you've gone abroad, to study abroad, a lot of that business model is, trying to keep students there, and so we'll fill a lesson with like teaching you new vocabulary, then we'll learn like, a different trick this day, come back next month and renew your course for that. But in the end, it's not actually going to help you because they don't have the interest. Their interest, the teachers in the school's interest, is not to get you the score you need as quickly as possible. Because if they just said to you, these are your 2 key mistakes, fix them, right? And then, you'll have a good chance of getting the score that you need. You wouldn't be their student for that long.
It wouldn't make any money. So that is another big problem. And I think you hit on another problem, which is when you walk into a classroom, you don't want to have a bad relationship with the students. So you want to be friendly with them and give them what they want. But what they want and what they need are normally 2 completely different things. So that means that teachers will often give tricks and cheats and things like that to keep the students happy. But it will also mean that they don't do the most important thing, which is to criticize their work and tell them what their weaknesses are. And I think one of the reasons why our students are so successful is because it kind of stems from my personality, where I don't care if the students like me or not. I really only care about the results, because I've dealt with so many students who you do see when they get the results, the difference that it makes to their lives. And I'd rather do that and for them to hate me a little bit. We don't criticize people's personalities and we're not overly harsh, but we just say it how it is. You are not going to pass until you fix A, B, and C. And it doesn't matter what you do or how many times you do the test or how much you practice, you will not pass until you fix these A, B, C, D. It could be 5 things, it could be 1 thing. Thank you very much, guys. I really, really appreciate your time. What we're going to do is we are going to make another video where we answer students' frequently asked questions. So what I would like you to do, guys, is in the comments below, write a question that you would like the 4 of us to answer. So it could be something that you are really struggling with, or something that you've seen on the internet and like one teacher says this and another teacher says the opposite, or something that you just need help with. Comment below, and next week we will make the same style of video where we answer the most popular questions. If you've enjoyed this video, give it a like. If you want some more information, check out the rest of our YouTube channel. Check out IELTSadvantage.com. And we will see you again next week. Michelle, David, Damien, thank you so much for shedding some light on those myths. I'm sure we'll see you again soon. Thanks very much, guys.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everybody.